Hello and welcome to another video lecture from MrWatkins.com. Today's video lecture is going to be on cellular respiration. This will be kind of an overview but a little more detailed than a basic overview. So cellular respiration is the process by which sugar, and particularly glucose, is broken down in the cell into smaller units. Glucose has a lot of energy, 686 kilocalories per mole of energy. That's a lot more than your cell needs to do a lot of the reactions that your body requires, the individual reactions. And so this molecule needs to be broken down into smaller molecules that have the right amount of energy to run the different reactions, so you're not using way more energy than you need for those reactions. Cellular respiration excuse me, starts with glycolysis. Glyco means sugar, and lysis means to split or to break. So glycolysis, we're going to break the sugar down, and this sugar is glucose. Glucose has the chemical formula C6H12O6, and if you'll notice, there are 6 carbons on that particular molecule. So glucose gets split into 2 molecules. These are called pyruvate, or pyruvic acid, I think is how we have it in our notes. And pyruvic acid is a 3-carbon molecule. So this 6-carbon molecule, sugar, gets split into 2 3-carbon molecules. That is the process of glycolysis. Now, if you're an organism that requires oxygen, so you require oxygen, and oxygen is available. So organism requires oxygen, and O2 is available. Then this pyruvic acid will go into the mitochondria into a process called the Krebs cycle. There's another name for this. It's also TCA cycle. It's also citric acid cycle. These are all the same names for this particular thing. Now this is a cycle, so the molecules are going to go around in a little circle, and you're going to get some products produced here on the end. Now these products are going to be carbon dioxide. They're going to be ATP. And if you haven't seen the other lecture on ATP, you may want to look at it. ATP stores energy. We're also going to get NADH, and that's nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, but you just need to know that that's an energy carrier, and another energy carrier called FADH2. CO2 is given off as a gas. That's what we give off. Plants take in oxygen, we give off gas. Plants actually do give off some carbon dioxide. ATP, this is the small energy molecule that we want to have. It's got the right amount of energy for lots and lots of reactions that the cell needs to do. So that's really what we're looking for. NADH and FADH2 are electron carriers. Now these 2 electron carriers, basically they store energy in the form of those hydrogens that have an electron attached to them, that they basically store that energy so that that energy can be used, and in this case, these 2 electron carriers will be sent to a thing called the Electron Transport Chain, or the ETC. The ETC takes NADH and oxygen, so oxygen gas comes in. Here's why you need to breathe in oxygen, and converts this NADH to NAD, and in the process, at the end of this, will make ATP. FADH2 also goes through the ETC, and this big process here will end up making more ATP. This process here and across the top, that includes glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain, this process is aerobic cellular respiration. Aerobic meaning air, cellular respiration. This is what you and I do. This is what animals do. Plants do this as well. We tend to focus on other things with plants. Let's say that you're an organism, though, that requires oxygen, but there's just not enough oxygen available. You're starved for oxygen for some reason. Maybe coach has made you run. So the organism requires oxygen, but there is no O2, no oxygen is available, or it's available in such a limited supply that it's causing some problems. And you've probably experienced this when you've used some muscle to where it started to hurt. Just take a tennis ball and squeeze it. And after a minute or so, squeezing that tennis ball, you're going to start feeling the burn in your hand. And that burn comes from the lactic acid buildup that occurs in those muscles. This process here is called lactic acid fermentation. So you get lactic acid built up, and it's called lactic acid fermentation. And this process does not make any more ATP. Doesn't make any ATP. No CO2 is given off. And this process is called anaerobic respiration. So here, you've got enough oxygen, everything is fine. This would be like walking to class. This part would be as if coach made you run and run and run and run until basically your muscles started burning and you were making lactic acid in those muscles. Now there are some organisms, these organisms do not require any oxygen to survive, to live. They don't use it. In fact, some of these organisms, the oxygen is actually poisonous to their system, can cause major problems. So no oxygen is required for these organisms to survive. Now these organisms will make a product called ethanol. A product that you're familiar with. It's used in beer, it's used in gasoline. You also get carbon dioxide. The organisms that typically do this, these organisms are yeast and bacteria. Now, yeast, when we use yeast to do this, we use that so that it will actually make bread rise. So you put the yeast into the sugar and the flour mixture, you let it sit for a little while so the yeast can do this process, creating carbon dioxide gas, which is given off. And that gas, when it's given off, gets trapped in that mixture and it causes the bread to rise. You bake the bread, it breaks off the alcohol, it releases the CO2. You cut into the baked bread and you see these little pockets or holes. That's where the CO2 had expanded that flour out before it got cooked. And so that's how you get that light and fluffy middle. Ethanol, that's an alcohol, and it's one that we do drink. You just have to be very, very careful with this because we're relying on these organisms to produce the right alcohol with the right functional groups, the right pieces in there, so it doesn't make you sick. And that's why there's special limitations in breweries and things that do that. Now, because this, though, is an alcohol, this process here, so this process, and it does include glycolysis, this process is called alcoholic fermentation. Now, you need to understand something here, and it's a pretty important piece. The process that includes glycolysis and this part here, that is aerobic cellular respiration. So glycolysis, Krebs cycle, etc., that's aerobic cellular respiration. The process that includes glycolysis and lactic acid fermentation or alcoholic fermentation, so we have our glycolysis, but we have these other two possibilities. This is called anaerobic. And if you remember, anaerobic, or an in front of a word, means not. So this is not air, so we're not using air. Now, where students sometimes get confused, and this confusion is easy to see. If you're an organism that requires oxygen, but there's not enough available, you're either going to go Well, you're going to go through anaerobic cellular respiration, and it's lactic acid fermentation, that type of anaerobic cellular respiration. If you're an organism that does not require oxygen, then you are only going to be anaerobic, and you're going to go down this pathway. Humans don't do this. Humans don't go through the process that's anaerobic on this end. In other words, you're not going to switch. So you either go through one of these two, or you go through this one. You don't do both. And organisms that do not require oxygen typically do not go up here. There are some bacteria that will do that, just like there are some bacteria that do require oxygen, and they have some special things set up so that they can do this part. But for the most part, you've got these three pathways: glycolysis through Krebs and etc., aerobic, glycolysis to lactic acid, anaerobic, or you're an organism that is glycolysis through ethanol, and you're still anaerobic, but this is alcoholic fermentation. These are just the very basic details of what you need for cellular respiration. Thank you.